1 minute for people to join. I think people are coming in now fast and furious. In the meantime, maybe just to entertain us while we wait, I'm going to show you a TFCA video so we can be reminded of what the world looks like beyond our offices and some of the work we are doing. Thanks. In the meantime, please register yourself in the chat. Let me just get to those instructions. Your full name, organization, and country, please. And keep your just keep your mics off so that we don't disturb everybody. Thank you very much. Rolly, if you can just confirm that you are getting sound if on the other side, as soon as I start projecting this.
Ubambisana kwenu uma sibambisana ngevidiyo umsoka ukuthi sonke sihlangane sibe fana naleli langa nathi esikulo ngoba lilanga liba lihle yabona nani silibukayo.
In the Southern African Development Community, countries have come together to develop trans-frontier conservation areas with a dream to connect Africa's natural and cultural resources, improve socio-economic development, and promote regional peace and stability. The pioneers that first believed in the goals of TFCAs and subsequently the reason they invested in them was that country borders and protected area boundaries can be an obstacle for wildlife to move.
Wildlife normally moves freely. It doesn't recognize the international boundaries that humans create. Their movement is dictated by the natural rhythm
farming ya kwa hulu wanne kulaka ni amocho ni balimi ka bufela kakalikani kakona kulofa kutulo yetuna
Kuna ni chinjo nyane ese editeni. Akulia, alokata pa tawe adita business there.
So farmers are excited. They are not stranded. People have money. Children are going to school.
Kuba leli banda la TFCA basifundise. Sina 4 students ema-hospitality labahambe bayofundela baqeqesha. Sebayawati ke lo msebenzi nabo ke sebafundisa labanye.
The establishment of transfrontier conservation areas is a leading example of what is possible when countries work together.
Collaboration between countries is so important because it makes life easy for the people living in both countries.
It means bringing together the countries in protecting the wild natural areas that we have, to look after them and also to benefit the communities that are living in those areas.
About what to give back to our guests, the memories that they take back home. I feel that's more important than anything else.
If we all can actually agree and try by all means to bring everyone into the picture, this is going to change our life.
We'll only realize the value of their wetlands, drylands, other ecosystems when they're long gone.
It goes to show that when we live in unison with nature and share knowledge across borders, we optimize the abundance of fauna and flora that Africa has to offer. Transfrontier conservation areas are thereby ensuring the conservation of our wildlife for generations to come.
Good afternoon again. I hope you could hear some of that. Apparently the sound wasn't great. But just a reminder of some of the areas we're working in and some of the work we still need to do. So welcome to the SADC TFCA network webinar discussion. It's not one we planned on having, but due to the response that there's a need to discuss what is happening in terms of the US withdrawal of support to the sector, we have arranged this webinar discussion to give you a sense of what we want to do today, and we're going to try and keep to the time that I was going to get this right. That we allocated. I'm going to move right along. So yeah, please, I see people have been registering themselves in the chat. Please continue to do that. If you have questions or comments, you can either raise your hand or certainly when we ask for comments afterwards, type them in the chat and we might call on you to speak. You don't have to, but it'd be great if we had some interaction when we have our discussion a part of the webinar. The objective of this webinar is to discuss the implication of the reduced financial aid coming from and technical support coming from the US, and to start talking about alternative funding and policy responses, and to try and have a conversation amongst ourselves. I think a lot of us have been having conversations one-on-one or within our own organizations. And I think this is an opportunity to see how this decision is impacting across the whole region and across the sectors. So this is an image I found. I think one of the things about the large language models is they are trained obviously on information that's a bit old. So when I asked ChatGPT a question and I asked to go to the source of what the answer was, and the question was, I was trying to see if there was a record of the kind of work that had been supported by the US in the sector. I was then directed to a USAID website, which is no longer working. So that's the that's where that image comes from. I wish I could say it was AI generated. It is, I suppose, in a way, but it's a reflection. If any of you have, for example, tried to access any of the US government websites, you will probably face the same kind of problem. So what we want to do in the next hour is we're going to quickly, after this, after I've talked a bit, do a Mentimeter survey. And then, which should take 2 minutes, and then we're going to talk really about the context within which the suspension has taken place. I think I want to acknowledge and just mention some of the work that was previously done by USAID. And I'm sure there'll be a lot I'll miss, and people can certainly add in the chat anything they remember. And then I will go, that'll take 10 minutes. And then I'm going to open the floor to have you tell us about what you understand and what the impact has been on your programs, either your planning or on programs that you are part of at the moment that you are having to adjust in some way. We're going to get some of that feedback and get a bit of a sense of it. I'm sure we'll not get everything. And then we want to talk about future resource mobilization. And we've got a colleague from the Sustainable Finance Coalition who's just going to say a few words about some of the work we're planning. So for the Mentimeter, you should be able to scan your phone and see the survey. I'm going to do it myself just to also check that it's working. Maybe you can give me indication if you're managing to get in. Rolly, will you share the live results? Is that what you're showing there? My phone is having difficulties getting into OHO. Belina, did you say you're in? Okay, great. All right, so I think let's go.
Live results when it's done. Sorry.
Okay. All right, perhaps we could go to, okay, so if you could just work through the questions. Rolly, is that the way it's going to work?
Okay, that's fine. If everybody's ready, we can go to the first question. You have to present, Steve, for it to actually allow us to do it mobile.
Okay, I must need to close. Sorry, a hailstorm just arrived in Johannesburg.
Yeah, just press present so that we're able to go to the next question. Well, to the first question, rather. Okay, the first question is, what institution do you work in? So this is us just trying to find out who's in the room with us. So we'll just give it a few seconds. Okay, so there's a lot of NGOs, followed by other sectors, and then government and public sectors.
Okay, I think
And
I'm going to move on. You can keep
Yeah.
adding as you go along.
Okay, the next question is, what do you think are the two most immediate effects of the US funding suspension? So we have a couple of answers here. Reduction in conservation projects, increased biodiversity loss, conflicts between NGOs competing for reduced funds, increased conflict between communities and conservation, and loss of conservation jobs. Okay, I think we can move on to the next one. Then, to what extent was your planned work funded by US funds? 0 to 20%, 20 to 50%, 50 to 75%, or 70 to 100%. Okay, I think we can move on. And then, how can conservation efforts adapt to the funding suspension? I see collaboration, prioritization, diversify funding sources, lobbying USG, sadly significant cutbacks, looking for alternative funding. There are multiple answers here. I believe that's the last one, is it, Steve? Or is there next?
I think so.
Okay. Let me pull up the results.
All right, so thank you. I think that's a useful indication. There clearly have been impacts on some of the work we're wanting to do. I did share some resources and an interesting article by Monga Bay on the WhatsApp group. Just that's starting to talk about some of the impact. And I know beyond our sector, something like the health sector, literally thousands of jobs have disappeared overnight. The impact is there, and we're going to feel it for a while to come. Let me just move on to the next bit of our webinar. So some of the things that I've seen, and it's quite hard to exactly give exact figures on some of this, but some figures we do know, for example, is that globally, USA government provides around $60 billion per year in non-military foreign support. It sounds like a lot, but apparently it's approximately 1% of the budget of the US government. And in 2023, USA provided just over $375 million to biodiversity projects across the globe. And beyond US aid, there's also, and we know because we work with those organizations, US Forestry Service, the US Fish and Wildlife Service, that have supported SADC and the member states and organizations in many ways. In particular, for ourselves in this community, the TFCA program in all its different aspects, the law enforcement, anti-poaching, the transboundary water and rural development programs are all parts of work that we need to do, that we are doing, that has been supported by US support. And just an indication of the level of support within the SADC region, in 2023, the Regional Development Objective Agreement was signed, and a budget allocated of $224 million to support development priorities within SADC. The context, I'm sure many of you know this, but maybe in years to come, when someone looks at this webinar, they'll be looking back and saying, what happened? What happened was on the 24th of January, President Donald Trump signed an executive order 14169, which was called Reevaluating and Realigning US Aid Foreign Aid. And a 90-day pause began. We haven't got through that pause yet, but there have been developments since. Clearly, some programs are not going to continue, and have been, people are being demobilized, etc. Then there was a court order that there's been some opposition to this within America, and people have gone to court saying that this is just not correct. You've got agreements with individuals that are workers. You've got agreement with governments, with institutions such as SADC. You should not just immediately freeze aid. That was ordered. I believe that this has been overturned now, and there is a discussion happening within society and within people in America about whether there will be adherence to court proceedings or not. So this is something we are living through this process as we go on. That being said, historically, I think we do need to recognize that I don't know who's the biggest funder, who's the less, but certainly USAID and funding from the USAID into the conservation and rural development sector, they have been one of the top organizations in terms of the quantum of support that they have given to the region. And that's began quite a while ago, from the 1980s. There are some of you who are on this call who have been around as long as I have, and might be able to recall the Southern African Regional Program and the community-based natural resource management programs that we've take for granted, such as the Namibian Community Conservancy programs, Campfire in Zimbabwe. They were supported by USAID, and that investment is there. It's in the region. It's reflected in policies. It's reflected in the way we organize. And that was made possible through a program such as that one. There was a program called Sustainable Conservation Approaches in Priority Ecosystems that ran 2009 to 2017, had worked with in both CASA and GLTFCA areas, identifying priority migratory corridors, etc. And that information and the strategies and the work that was done then, we are still building on and using today. Many of you will recall the Southern African Regional Environment Program, SARIP, working in the Okavango River Basin, as well as in the CASA area, based out of Gaborone. Resilience in the Limpopo River Basin from 2012 to 2017, and the Resilient Waters Program, both of which I was very proud to be part of. And I know some of the good work that's been done there. And in addition to those kind of broad conservation programs, there have also been support specifically for some of the law enforcement and anti-poaching initiatives taken by SADC. We'll remember the VUCA Now program, and a program which we heard at our annual meeting was about to begin, the Combating Wildlife Crime program, which I was sad to get notice on Friday from Simon that basically that program has now ceased. In the past, USAID support has been used to develop our current LEAP strategy and TFCA program, and the support to organizations such as Traffic and the IUCN, for example, in the Wildlife Traps Project, is testimony to the legacy of the support that we in SADC have managed to get from USAID. And we are grateful for that. And I think I've been speaking to people, and the loss has already been felt, but we do acknowledge the amount of work that has been done. So if I think, and these are really my reflections, it's not a thesis or a definitive list that in any way, but if I think of kind of the regional high level impacts that we've got from the TFCA program perspective, I think the regional appreciation we have for community-based natural resource management, community rights-based approach and equity approaches, that is a result of some of the work supported by USAID in the past. The linkages, we have just been talking about them continually now, like it's something we should be doing and we are doing, between our river basin organizations in SADC and the transfrontier conservation areas. That in part, I think, comes about and was certainly consolidated by USAID running programs like Resilum, SARIP, and Resilient Waters, which focused on both those institutions and got them to work together, RBOs and TFCAs. Over the last 20 years, USAID has supported SADC participation from government officials to SADC Secretariat to community-based organizations in global dialogues, such as CITES, the IUCN World Conservation Congresses, the World Parks Congresses, and indeed our very network that we're part of, the SADC TFCA network. They have been part of building these institutions as well as enabling our participation. And the numerous strategies and policies that we are implementing, they have supported in the past. So, as I said, not a definitive list, but just, I think, an opportunity for us to acknowledge the support that we've got so far. But unfortunately, we also have to acknowledge that what has happened in the last 2 months, as shocking as it is, we need to acknowledge and find a way to get along without, I suppose. So at this point, what I'm going to do is stop talking and take opportunity to, one, see the chat and see what's been happening there, but secondly, to invite Karine Nulimba from Maliasili, who as an organization have responded quite incredibly. I must say, I was looking at some of the resources you produced, Karine, to help organizations work through this and develop strategies. But I thought it would be useful if you could just share with us from your perspective, maybe some of the impacts and some of what your organizations you work with are saying to you about the impact of this decision.
Sure. Thanks, Steve. Hi, everyone. Yeah, so Maliasili provides organizational strengthening support to 54 local NGOs that all work in conservation with a focus on community-led conservation in Africa. So our focus is on the continent. And amongst our partner organizations, of those 54, about a third of those organizations have been directly affected, where they've lost funding themselves. Amongst them, the one that has been most severely affected is the Kenya Wildlife Conservancy Association. They've lost half of their funding. And then other organizations, it's been different levels of severity have lost. Some of them have lost funding that is really core to their operations. Others have lost funding for projects that are not an absolute priority, but that were very much part of their programming for this year and the coming years. Some of them had also pre-financed work that they will not be receiving money back for. So that's been a big blow for them, is that they had anticipated being reimbursed, and that's not going to happen. So it has all sorts of ripple effects on their operations more broadly. What we are seeing is that this is what we've seen with USAID, and what we are telling our partners is that this is the dismantling of USAID. It's at this point we are all hoping, and there was this anticipation, it's a 90-day freeze, there will be a review, but that's not what we're seeing. So we're trying to be quite realistic about it. Although it's devastating, what we are anticipating is that this is the dismantling of USAID, and that alongside this, we're seeing a rise in populism and nationalism all over. And so, Belgium's reduced its aid funding by 25%. The Netherlands has also started with the process to reduce its funding. The UK, we've seen the recent announcement of this shift of funding to their defence budget. We will see a gradual increase of defence budgets across Europe. So I think, like, the key message for us has been this is, as much as we wish it was temporary, it isn't temporary, and that we need to pivot. We need to respond and be agile. So what is it that we've done in Maliasili in order to help organizations to make the necessary adjustments? Firstly, internally in Maliasili, we have prioritized the need to support these organizations with reviewing their budgets, reviewing their revenue pipelines. So stepping away from our own internal programming, which might have focused on strengthening their teams or improving other aspects of their organizations. And right now we're saying, no, the priority is helping these organizations to adjust to what in some cases is quite dramatic reductions in budgets. So they are looking at deferring certain activities, things that are not urgent, things that might be optional expenses, and also there's this realization that there will be a loss of staff, that many organizations will be left with no other option but to retrench some of their team, and that those are tough choices that they need to make, and that we can support them in some of the processes and the thinking around the prioritization that will be necessary in order to make these strategic decisions that are inevitable. Oh, sorry, there's a lot of thunder. I don't know if it can be heard on Zoom, but I got a fright there with the thunder in Windhoek. And then what we've also done is to reallocate some of our own funding in Maliasili where we have flexible funding. And I must say, Maliasili itself, thankfully, has not been affected. So we have tried to avoid the kind of inflexible funding that USAID that has generally come from institutions like USAID, and that's been to our benefit. But of course, we know that that's not the privilege of most organizations. And so we do have some flexibility in our own budget, and we've looked at setting aside some of that budget in order to provide like emergency bridge funding to organizations. And my colleague Marano is on the call as well. She and I have been on several calls to think through what are the criteria that we use to determine what is a priority and which of these organizations to support. So that has been with a small basket of funding from our own resources, about $300,000, but we're also seeing the priority of keeping donors informed. We've realized many donors are desperate for information. Foundations, donors that are very allied to us in the way that they see this and that desperately want to support, but they're not quite sure how to support. So we're seeing, and I think this is a responsibility for all of us collectively, to help donors understand the importance of the work of local civil society organizations, and to better communicate the impact of these local NGOs and the work that they do, just how critical their work is to achieve conservation successes, and then to work with these local NGOs to adjust their communication approaches in order to access different audiences, different potential sources of funding. And so for us, this has reinforced something that I've chatted with Steve with a few times, and Lisa as well more recently. We really stress the importance of organizations seeking sources of funding that are what we call good funding, flexible funding, as unrestricted as possible, and long-term funding. And so this has reinforced this principle for us, and we're working hard with our local partners to amplify their voices and to work collectively to try and access more of that good funding. And then finally, what we realized is really important is to get people talking with each other internally, to share how they are adjusting, how they are applying some of these difficult decisions. So building this community of NGO leaders who are talking with each other and facilitating those conversations has been something that we've been trying to do.
Great, thank you, Karina. I think it's wonderful, and it's as you say, you can feel like you're in a privileged situation because your funding is not coming from the USA. But just looking even into the chat, the chances of other traditional funders also being stretched and also starting to develop their own priorities, and it's something we do need to think about. Maybe we need to become more efficient, but at the end of the day, a lot of the work actually takes resources. And I think many NGOs probably also already operate at quite an efficient level. There are not many NGOs are now in this sector that have fat. They can say, okay, well, we're going to do this or this, you know, and some of the things like just like funding boots on the ground. I know there has been some impact on some of those programs, and I don't know if anybody would like to just come on. You can just raise your hand and you can unmute yourself, which came on if you want, and just if you'd like to talk about some decisions you've been having to make about letting people go, stopping work that you were going to be doing. I saw in the answers to the questions there certainly were organizations that are impacted. I don't know anybody would like to. I hope you're watching the chat. I haven't had time to look at it all in the yet, but anybody, you're welcome to come on. I don't know if I know Imakando, you are here. You were part of the Combating Wildlife Crime program, which was about to begin. Perhaps you could just reflect from your perspective. I know you were gearing up to start. Perhaps what some of the challenges you're now going to face. I know the program's been cancelled. Doesn't take the need away, and maybe that's something that we also have to be wary of, is forgetting what we were trying to address by having these programs and designing these programs. I can say that I know USAID were looking at a kind of program to follow on from the Resilient Waters program, and they had extensively consulted with stakeholders in the region about what would be useful in terms of the support to the TFCA, support to the river basin organizations. And I think there sometimes is a misperception that all support and aid comes with a top-down approach. But I think the impression I get from USAID's work in the region has been that it's very much been stakeholders have identified the need. So it's not a case of programs being imposed. It was identified needs being met by either technical support or financial support, grants, etc. Mike Musgrave's point, the conversation community has been sleeping at the wheel. Dambisa Moyo published Dead Aid in 2009, consensus among a wide range of professionals as I speak, that it's time to move on. Yeah, Mike, I agree with you, and I think we're going to move on quite soon to hear from Mariam about some of the work we want to do around sustainable financing. One of the things I have been looking at, partly as a result of this decision, but partly just because I'm not that up to speed with the kind of COP decisions, but there is this new Cali fund, which has now been set up. And I think we need to find out potentially what it could do. It involves a global consensus and agreement on creating a fund which would have a levy attached to it, 1% of profit or 0.1% of turnover, I think 0.01% of turnover, of companies that use biological resources, genetic material for food industry, for clothing industry, etc. And I think creating a global consciousness that those companies should contribute that amount to go to support the actual biodiversity that needs to be protected where these resources come from. I think the people on this call would understand that we are based completely on the ecosystems and we rely on them completely, but some people don't understand that. They just exploit it and continue. But this would be recognition of that. And I think what's interesting in even the way they formulated this fund, that 50% of the funding should go to indigenous people, local communities who are now accepted as the most cost-effective and the most beneficial way in which biodiversity can be protected is if it's managed by the people that have local contact with that biodiversity. So I think there is potential in the future, but it doesn't mean we should just say, oh, well, let's wait now for this fund to come along, because that's certainly not the answer. I'm just seeing here in the chat, there's discussions about whether the EU cooperation. I think one of maybe the questions, I mean, I can't answer, I'm not part of the EU, but one of the shocking things for me about this process has been the way in which it has unfolded. I think it's one thing to talk about the objectives of what you're trying to do, but I think nobody expected decisions to happen so fast, but maybe that was a bit of a naivety on our part in terms of the vulnerability of a government that commits and year by year to certain funding. I recall decisions before the election when people said, oh, well, if the Republicans win, they generally support conservation. They like conservation. They're not maybe there'll be a climate change impact, but this is way beyond. I think it's a case, and I unfortunately have to agree with Karine that maybe this is the end of US aid. Because the one thing I think we must acknowledge, it takes a long time to build trust, but it's very easy to break down. And I think the way this is unfolded is unfortunately going to lead a lot of people to question whether they can have a long-term partnership with any kind of security with the US aid or the State Department. So if nobody wants to particularly come on and talk about the impacts, because it's probably so depressing that we've all been thinking about them too much, I would be quite happy to move on to quite coincidentally some of the work that we wanted to do with SADC around trying to find sustainable local financial solutions and resources. And I would ask Mariam, are you on the call? Umaji from the Sustainable Finance Coalition. Mariam, if you could just talk about the community of practice and some of the work we wanted to do. I know it focuses on the TFCAs, but I think what you're talking about will have relevance to some of the other work as well. Welcome. Thanks for joining us from Amsterdam, I believe.
Yes, very cold Amsterdam, so I'm missing home. Thank you for having me. I just do a quick introduction, making sure I'm following all protocols. So the project, the Sustainable Finance Coalition, will be working with the climate resilience and natural resource management in the SADC region, which is a GIZ EU supported program. Under that, there is a capacity for TFCAs, and this is where I'm located. I just started. We're in inception since last week, and the objective is to use the trial and tested model from the Sustainable Finance Coalition to the TFCAs and make them doers at scale, and I'll explain a bit on that. So that is where I'm coming from in terms of program and project. Organizationally, I'm housed with the Sustainable Finance Coalition. The Sustainable Coalition finds, designs, and mobilizes a set of financial solutions for nature from incubation to implementation. This is a non-for-profit coalition that has developed this model of a three-step approach that has the find, the design, and the mobilize. And we have also very recently made public the sustainable, the solutions inventory, and I will share the links in the chat in a few minutes. So under the project, the objective is to select and work with 2-3 TFCAs from the SADC region, supporting them to find the right solutions for the right places and for the right people, meaning that it can go from different instruments, financial instruments, from bonds to other stuff, and take them from inception to implementation so that those funds and the flow of funds is unlocked. Under that program and the project, we are working under the leadership of Steve. We are going to support on having this community of practice that will have from exchange of learnings like we're doing today on the funding issue. We will have peer learning, boot camps, newsletters, all sorts of activities to make sustainable finance available to the huge variety of stakeholders that is working on those issues, and also making sure that people understand it and can implement it and take it into practice. So yeah, in a nutshell, you will be hearing and seeing more of me and of the Sustainable Finance Coalition, and we will also tag along with the work that Steve is doing and supporting you with sustainable finance solutions content going forward. I don't know if I'm forgetting anything, Steve. Feel free to add, or Lisa. I know she's also in the call and to support me.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Miriam. No, I think it's, as Mark says, we maybe have been sleeping, getting comfortable, in the sense that, okay, the aid is and support is going to continue. But I think partly we've got a bit of a wake up maybe when we realized that to rely as a biodiversity sector on tourism has been one of the main funders of management of tourism. Pandemic came, we realized that we all said, okay, now we've got to move away from tourism. And I don't think we really did. I mean, I think we just kind of settled into either some kind of subsidies or tourism coming back. So we rest on our laurels. But I think we do, and SADC from a secretariat and the members of the network from the different focal points from government, they are committed to the TFCA program. They're committed to this transboundary cooperation because they know it has value. They know it delivers results in terms of, for example, dealing with poaching across borders, dealing with sharing, opening new tourism borders, border posts, etc. But they also realize that it's quite often difficult if you're a partnership of 3 countries like the GLTFCA, for the countries are at different levels of development. They've also got their own budget priorities. To try and find a financial solution to fund the secretariat function, to fund the coordination work that's needed. Never mind the rural development and conservation management work that needs to happen, that we cannot rely on donors to do that because they get tired of funding the same thing over and over. So the issue is, do we as Southern Africans see value? Can we express the value of that work? Can we find the users of that value to buy into that and to find a way to fund this work, which up to now has meant the lack of funding. I think one of the impacts of the lack of funding up to now is some very good people get they're insecure. They're sitting doing this great coordination work, but they know year by year they are dependent on some donor somewhere saying yes to a funding thing. There's no direct value or long-term funding which is secured. So that's really the work we want to do with the Finance Coalition. We're going to work on hopefully 3 TFCAs. And ironically, I think one of the areas in which USAID was considering supporting going forward was to join us in doing this work before this decision was made. But we're going to have to do it without them, basically, at this stage. Miriam, and I think just to me, I might have missed it because my line was breaking up a bit. We with the Finance Coalition, you can expect to hear about different webinars on different subjects. So we know there are other possible sources of funding. For example, is a debt swap for nature an opportunity to raise funding for conservation work? Yes, it is, but what does it really mean? Which countries are eligible? All these kinds of things. That's something maybe we would make a topic of a webinar, and we'd try to bring together the network to have that discussion. I think similarly, we can maybe get somebody from CPD to come and talk about the Kali Fund and how the Kali Fund is going to operate. But we will be in touch with everybody via the WhatsApp group, and certainly via the portal once we get it up and running and functioning again. Mariam?
Exactly, Steve. I just put it in the chat, the links to the coalition, to the inventory, which I highly recommend everyone to visit. And in the coalition inventory, you'll find the financial solutions wheel, and where you find things from bonds to insurance products, green bankable projects, nature credits, biodiversity offsets, and so and until the more traditional instruments and solutions as well. There is the more innovative solutions from blended finance, debt swaps, and others.
Mariam, you push the mute button.
And if we are also going to explore on the more innovative side of things, from the blended finance, alternative sources of finance, the debt swaps for nature that is taking traction, especially in Latin America, and from which we can learn from, and many other examples. But we are also open to suggestions on doing specific webinars on specific teams. We will also share more information in different mediums as we go. So yeah, this is just, we're just starting, and I hope that soon you are not fed up with us and the amount of information we are going to feed you with. And hopefully you are going to use it in practice. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Mariam. Also to mention that part of the joint action support, CNRM and EU to SADC, we have agreed, and we are in the process of working with the TFCA finance facility to improve the quality of applications that have been coming to the grants program when it's been opened. We're hoping, and I know organizations like Malia Sealy are already working with NGOs on these issues about how to describe your work, how to develop a theory of change, how to convince a donor, because I think the reality is, as much as we say, okay, this is a big cut, I really believe there are many funds that sit there, they are not getting spent from the philanthropic side, from the private sector side, because the people that are applying for the work are not able to make the case, articulate the work they do sufficiently, and the money sits there. And I think we also, from our side, have recognized this, and we would like to use this network to work with NGOs, smaller organizations, to partner with some of the larger organizations that have the capacity. And we know we need everybody. The scale of this task is big. So we're going to need everybody to be able to do the work. We're going to be more efficient at it, but we've got to be able to access it. So keep a lookout for that. We will be, once we've got the training, and it will be initially a training course where you'll be able to participate. We'll certainly keep you informed, and we'll ask people to participate within that. Mariam?
Yeah, just to add, if there has been a time where you need to tell your stories of your organizations and the impact you are creating on the ground, that time is now, as Steve is saying. That capacity to articulate where do you want to achieve, where do you want to get, how you are getting there, and why finance is important in that journey. That is something we will also be exploring and supporting you with, independent of solution or modality or source of funding. There is already a lot out there. It's that capacity to be able and having that messaging ready to go. So just to underline that as well.
Great. Thank you. Christina, Kesh, okay, thank you. I see your numbers there. I will take note of them, and I will add you to the WhatsApp group. I think in times of stress and pressure which this decision is causing, I think it's helpful to know there are other people facing some of the same problems, and there are a lot of people in this network. So I would urge you, if you're not on the WhatsApp group, give me your number and I will add you to the SADC TFCA network WhatsApp group. Also join the network at the TFCA portal, because as you're hearing, we are going to be trying to find ways to assist you, not just with fundraising, but also many other areas. For example, we are looking at peer-to-peer learning, so we can upscale successful case studies, which we know are working across the region. We don't need to keep reinventing. That's part about being more efficient. We know things are working. How can we upscale it to other parts of the region, to other TFCAs? I don't know. I think I'm talking a lot, me and Mariam. I don't know if everybody's feeling a bit too depressed to talk, or but I'm happy to end it, so we don't really take people's time. That in itself is a resource, and I'm sorry we started late. We had a few issues with the SADC Zoom facility, but I think in the end we managed to achieve what we wanted, which was, one, to, I suppose, take cognizance that this is a blow to the region in terms of, and the community of practice, but to recognize that there are things we can do about it. We're going to start trying to do those things. We're going to try to find a way that we are not so reliant. And if anybody has any useful information, either on this or other programs or funding opportunities, please use the network, use the WhatsApp group, use me, send stuff to me. I'm happy to post it. And so we can also find a way that we do maximize whatever resources, and the network is a resource. Our knowledge between us is a resource. Let's find a way that we share it more effectively, and where possible, help each other. And to those organizations that are having to face some really tough decisions and tough conversations with staff and others, really, I wish you well. We hope it's a temporary thing. We hope that we're able to get those people back and doing work at some stage in the future. So unless I see any hands up, I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you all very much for joining. We have recorded this, which would include, I'm happy to say, the chat, which I wasn't able to read everything, but also all those numbers I will save, and I will add to the WhatsApp group. I might reach out to you and just ask you some information before I add you. And I think with that, I will leave you. The last thing I will say is the SADC Secretariat, Ndapando, did want to be here. Unfortunately, she's traveling. She's in Tanzania at the moment. But I think from her side and the SADC Secretariat, they did want me to express thanks for your time. If there are journalists out there, let's get, I did invite quite a few journalists to the call. Let's get the message out to journalists as well, because I think if they can understand, they can communicate, then the possibilities of also finding people to fund projects is better. All right. So with that, thank you, everybody. Have a good afternoon further. Travel well, be safe, and remain optimistic.